All right, welcome to Roots of Reality Experiences. Today I'm joined by Dr. Daniel Martinez, who is a professor of biology at Pomona College and one of the world's leading scholars on hydroids, specializing in evolutionary developmental biology and the evolution of aging. His work has gained national attention for the theoretical immortality of the freshwater hydra. So, Dr. Martinez, thanks for coming on today.
You're welcome.
So, when did you first get interested in evolutionary biology and aging?
I did my PhD at Stony Brook in New York, and I was working there with some marine worms that reproduce asexually. And the theory at the time was that asexual creatures should not age. So, and I didn't believe it. So I decided to take the worms to the lab. They reproduce asexually by dividing and producing tails that then turn into a worm. So I did experiments to follow the head and show that they age. And when I was doing that work, I discovered that there was a claim that Hydra was immortal, which at the time, I mean, the dogma in biology at the time was that all animals will age because aging is an evolved feature of animals. So I didn't believe the claim that Hydra was immortal, but nobody has done any experiments. So I decided, okay, I'm going to show, like I did with the worms, that Hydra also ages. And I have no idea. I had never worked with Hydra before. I talked to Larry Slobodkin, a professor there at the time, and pretty famous ecologist and evolutionary biologist. He had hydra in the lab, so he told me how to collect them. Went to a pond in Long Island, collected some hydra, brought them to the lab, learned how to keep them alive, and started an experiment. This was in the last 2 years of my thesis. And I followed them for 4 years and showed that there was virtually no mortality whatsoever. And for a creature the size of a hydra, which is a few millimeters long, 4 years is a long time. There is a very strong correlation between age of first reproduction, which is correlated with size. The bigger you are, the longer it takes for you to start reproducing, and the longer you live. So Hydra starts reproducing a few days after they are born, and they should not live longer than a few months. And so 4 years with very little mortality suggested to me that maybe it was true that Hydra really escape aging. So I published a paper about that, suggesting that maybe it was immortal, it didn't age. And then I started working on development and forgot about it. And eventually, Max Planck Institute in Germany, demography Max Planck in Rostock, Germany, contacted me and suggested that we repeat the experiment, but for a longer time. Jim Baupel, an American who was the director of the institute in Rostock, contacted me and suggested that we do this, and we did. We have cohorts of Hydra here in my lab at Pomona, and also in their lab there in Rostock, and we follow Hydra in my lab for 12 years. We published a paper on PNAS after 7 years, and there was, again, no mortality, no indication that they stop reproducing, right? They can reproduce asexually. So we talk about budding rates, the number of buds that they produce, and they don't seem to show any signs of aging in reproduction either. So it looks like it's really escaping aging.
Wow. Okay. And so, just for clarification, what exactly are hydroids for people that are not
Okay.
familiar with them?
So hydroids are a group of invertebrates related to corals and jellyfish. So
Okay.
there's within Cnidaria is the phylum, phylum, there are anemones and corals, and then there are jellyfish, and then there's a group that has polyps and can alternate between polyps and jellyfish. They're called hydroids, and within this group, they're mainly marine, but hydra is freshwater, and it has lost the medusa phase, the jellyfish phase, so it's only a polyp, and it's a few millimeters long, and so yeah, so those are hydroids.
Okay. And so what were the things that you were doing to the hydroids to like sort of test whether they were immortal or not?
So they, since things like humans, there are signs of aging, right? You can tell when somebody's old by looking at them. But for many animals, that's not so obvious because they don't have gray hair, they don't wrinkle, so they might slow down. So measuring aging is hard. But the easier way is just to follow a cohort. So if you follow a group of 1,000 babies, you will see initially some mortality when the babies are tiny. They are very dependent on the care of parents. Their mortality goes down, and eventually after age 30, 40, you start to see an increase in mortality, and by age 100, most of those 1,000 babies will be dead.
Right.
Because there is an increase in mortality. That increase in mortality late in life is because of aging. So by following cohorts, this is what I did with the worms. You follow them and you see that there is an increase in age-specific mortality at all their ages. And that's an indication of aging. And that can come at any time, depending on the size of the creature. Mice will age at months of age, humans and elephants at many years. So, but yeah, so that's the way you measure. You follow a group of individuals that are born at approximately the same time, and you look for that increase in mortality after a given time.
Okay. So essentially the freshwater hydra that you're looking at shows no aging.
Not increase in mortality. So mortality seems to be unrelated to age, to time passing, which is not true for any other element.
Yeah.
When time passes, there is an increased mortality. Mortality starts to increase. My chances of dying are much higher than your chances of dying the next year because I'm older. So that increase in mortality late in life is a measure of aging. And there are curves that you can draw and you can measure what that rate is. Actually, that's people in the insurance company are very interested in that. They want to know how much they're going to charge you depending on what is your chances of dying. And of course, they do a lot of curving to see what those chances are for humans, but you can do it for any other creatures.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so like, what about inflicted death? Like, could you kill a
Yeah,
freshwater
you can
hydra?
kill hydra, but that's not
Okay.
aging, right? We
Right.
all can die at age 15
Okay.
or 17. Those are accidental deaths that have nothing to do with your age.
Sure.
So when you are doing the experiments that I was doing, you need to be very careful, because if you get tired and you start killing them because you're tired of the experiment, and believe me, you can get tired of these experiments because you had to be super gentle. You had to feed this hydra. I fed them 3 times a week in their mouth. You had to wash them after you feed them a few hours later. So it can be a very tiresome experiment. So if you start getting tired and you start killing them, you're gonna actually have a mortality that looks like aging. That has to do with your being tired of the experiment with time and nothing to do with the animal. So these are hard experiments to do because you're measuring mortality, and the mortality can be inflicted by the investigator.
Right. And so, when we're thinking about this, how do we connect this research then to human beings, and what can we learn about, hydra that can help us increase our own longevity?
I think that the main lesson for my experiments, for my discovery, was that actually animals do not need to age. We thought that all animals age. And the fact that hydra can escape aging, that it seems to escape aging, suggests that maybe other animals can do it too. Now, to extrapolate directly to humans, it's dangerous because we are very different from a hydra.
Yeah.
Hydra are made of stem cells. Most of their body are stem cells. These are cells, kind of embryonic cells that are constantly dividing. So we don't have a lot of those cells. Some of our tissues, most of our cells stop dividing, differentiate. They acquire a particular function. They become a heart. They become an eye, and they stop dividing. And that's important for us because we want our organs to remain of the shape we want them. We want the muscle cells to be muscle cells. We don't want it to continue to divide and change fates. So it's hard to extrapolate directly to humans, but the fact that there is an animal made of stem cells that can avoid aging suggests that maybe if we can get more stem cells in our bodies, that might help us. That might help us with regenerating older tissues, maybe our brains. Maybe we can get our neurons to, at least some of our neurons to regenerate, and maybe that will help us at older age. So the direct correlation is hard to draw, but the fact that there are animals, not all animals need to age, might be encouraging to some people.
Yeah. So, as a scientist, then when you're studying these concepts, you're thinking about aging, um, you know, do you think that then we should, as a species, as a society, should we continuously sort of pursue this idea of being able to combat aging and try to eliminate it, or do you think it starts to become a problematic in itself over time if people actually were to stop aging?
Well, yeah, that's more of the ethical problem than a biological problem. As
Yeah.
biologists, I think we should investigate everything.
Sure.
We
Sure.
should try to get people to be immortal.
Yeah.
I think we will fail. I don't think we can do that,
Okay.
but we should try it. Like we should try everything within limits, right?
Yeah.
But those limits have to be put by ethical considerations. Do we really want a world where everybody lives forever? Is that sustainable, for
Yeah.
example? I mean, we already have passed the stage of sustainability in the world. I mean, we can't sustain the populations that we have. So now that becomes a decision of society. Do we really want that? And then personally, I wouldn't want to live forever. I think it
Okay.
would be boring. I think it would be, what will be the purpose in life? The fact that I'm going to die, and I know that as I'm getting older, I have fewer years to live, that excites me. That gives me energy to say, hey, I want to do certain things now. And so I don't know if, we'll be as productive if we could live forever.
Hmm. Yeah, it is interesting, like the dilemma philosophically about, you know, at what point is life no longer worth living? And obviously, when you have that ticking clock, it's kind of always a reminder that like every moment actually matters, and
Yes.
it's not something that's a given. And you can't take it for granted.
Yeah.
So it is interesting to think about that. I guess the Hydra doesn't have to worry about that as much.
Yeah. Hydro doesn't have to. Well, death can happen even without aging.
Sure, of
So their
course.
chances of dying, even if we didn't age, we will still die,
Yeah.
and many of us have died from the pandemic,
Hmm.
the COVID pandemic. So that is still a problem. Um, but I don't think that I will not want to age. I
It,
mean, not to age.
yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess in some ways I mean, and obviously it is, it's kind of like the natural aspect of what it means to
Mhm.
be human. So if you get rid of that, then you kind of are changing what it means to be who we are in the first place.
Yeah, I think so. And you know, sometimes, I mean, a lot of people ask me this question, and I really don't have a good answer. It will be a personal choice. I bet there's a lot of people out there that would like to live forever. Yeah, some people intend to clone themselves. So, I mean, but I will never do that. I don't think I'm worth cloning.
Yeah.
So, but you know, that's a personal preference at a given point.
Yeah, so can like the does does the hydra, it produces asexually, right? So it's essentially cloning itself.
It does both,
Oh,
actually.
okay.
It produces sexually and asexually. It can produce buds, little babies, by just growing on their side, but they can also, they have sperm and eggs, and they can do sex.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is interesting when people think about cloning themselves because I mean we kind of already have that with identical twins and there are differences. You're not the same as your clone. So
Yeah.
I don't know, like, do you think there's any technologies that people will have where they can drastically increase longevity at some point based off of, research we see in animals or hydra or something?
I think, well, we're living much longer than we used to,
Sure.
and I think that any research in that regard is good because we want to live. I'm not sure longer, but better.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, if somebody could guarantee me that I'm going to live 120 years and I will start falling apart only in my last 10 years, I would like that.
Yeah.
Eh,
Yeah.
Now, from there to say we're going to live 500 years, I mean, there's people saying that.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not convinced by the evidence that we can do that. I think it's complicated for organisms like us that are very complex. We have a lot of organs. We have parts like bones that can become fragile. It's not easy to keep all that new.
Hmm.
So, but I think that we should try. I think
Sure.
that scientists should try because I think that we're gonna be able to live better, hopefully, by doing the research to try to be immortal.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, obviously, I think most people would want to increase their lifespan as long as you said, we're actually living a life that is worth living.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I guess the question eventually becomes, yeah, at what point have we kind of increased it to the point where it's no longer makes sense
yeah,
to continue, which is always a hard question to gauge given it's so theoretical. But
yeah, yeah. And then it will be ethical considerations, right? Who gets to live forever? Will the poor get to live forever, or only the rich, the people who can afford it? Will it be the
yeah,
first world or everybody in the world? Do we want a lot more poor people in the world? Or do we want a lot more rich people in the world? So then it becomes, there might be a war because of the lack of
sure,
aging, the
sure,
aging war. So yeah, then it becomes almost uh, science fiction, right?
yeah. So what do you make then? I mean, I'm sure you've heard of that there are some like super rich individuals that are like constantly trying to combat aging. Um, do you think that this type of research, when it's coming from someone who's just like kind of obsessed with the fear of aging, um, do you think that there is a have a disturbing difference between someone who's doing it from that perspective versus like a scientist in a lab studying the issue?
Yeah, well, I think that most research, thankfully, is done through universities, uh, public universities, private universities, but regulated by governments that provide most of the money. So I assume that a rich person can afford to have his or her own lab and hire people to do research that is specific to try to save them
Yeah.
and make them live forever. So I think that by regulating our research through the government, we are safe in that regard, because most of the research that is done with grants from NIH, NSF in the US, the German government, the Japanese government, whatever government is paying for that research. And I think that with that comes regulation. It comes, certain limits to what we decide to investigate. If some rich guy wants to, clone themselves or pay for their own research, that's fine with me. But I don't think that governments should pay for that because we have many other needs. But
Yeah.
again, it's an ethical consideration, right? Do we do research that is specific for white guys,
Hmm.
or we do research in malaria that mostly affects the third world? And we know the answer to that one. Um, you know, heart disease is a lot more studied than malaria, and
Yeah.
so that is already happening. Um,
Yeah, it's interesting because I know there's some rich people out there that are like have become kind of obsessed with the aging battle and are doing like I've heard of some people like doing blood transfusions, with like their kid or something like that to try to, doing all these kind of science fiction style experiments on themselves. And I think there's one issue with that in terms of just the kind of philosophy of it, where it seems very much kind of a self-focused research effort. The other aspect is just though like the amount of kind of pseudoscience that can be spread because it's not as well regulated, obviously, as a research at
yeah,
an institution. And so people could be trying all sorts of random things and then thinking it might be working and then telling others they should be doing it as well. So,
yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation, and in the age of TikTok, you can hear a lot of stuff that is not really true. So, but as long as they do it with their own money, I
yeah.
have no problem with that. I think it's a waste, but
Yeah.
the problem would be if they become powerful, and they are powerful. They can influence senators to vote for you know budgets for research that might go that way, and that
Mm,
we need to be careful with
sure.
because we don't want to spend NIH money uh, supporting that kind of research. At least we need to make sure that it's worth doing.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. Um, Thinking back to like the Hydra and stuff, what's like the oldest Hydra you've ever come across in your research?
Well, you can tell aging on something that doesn't age.
Okay, I guess that's
So,
true. That's right. You're going back to
so
that.
I
Yeah.
can go and pick up a hydra and measure its age. I could do that in humans
Yeah.
because I can look at you and I can kind of guesstimate what your age is. But
Sure.
in something that has an age, you cannot.
Wow.
So in my hands, I have a hydra. I have hydra, several hydra for 12 years. And then I fix them in alcohol because I couldn't continue the experiment
Hmm.
because I needed to do other stuff. But I have kept hydra alive from birth to 12 years.
Okay. Interesting. And other animals that have like incredible longevity abilities like the Hydra or
Well,
similar?
there are animals that seem to have they have features that suggest that that might be the case. For example, planarians can regenerate from little pieces. Associated with this ability to live for a long time, there is regeneration. A hydra, you can chop a hydra in 5 pieces and you get 5 hydra.
Wow.
Because since the bodies are made of stem cells, little pieces can regenerate entire bodies. Uh, there are animals like that, for example, planarians. Whether or not somebody has done an experiment following planarians for a long time, I really don't know. but they are animals with features that would suggest that they might live a long time and they may be able to escape aging. Yes, planarians are an example.
Interesting. Okay, so there are others that seem to have some pretty remarkable abilities. Then,
Yes,
okay.
yes, yes. I think that hydra is unique because I'm in love with the hydra, but yeah, there are animals
Yeah,
that may be able to be like a hydra.
that's right. Your
Yet to be
favorite.
determined.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I mean,
Yes.
so do you think then, like over time, as we continue to study life on our planet, that we're going to come across more and more kind of unique abilities in animals that kind of change how we think about, sort of life and death and the complexities involved?
I hope so. I mean, the beauty of what I do, being a scientist and a biologist in particular, is that, there are, I mean, life is incredible. Evolution has taken many, many, many different paths, and there are a lot of interesting creatures out there. Hopefully, we will, I mean, I'm sure that we will find um, lots of other um, animals that will just shock us and I mean, but we're learning about octopi, and I mean, this is amazing. But now we know they're a lot more intelligent than what we thought we knew. So there, it's just, yeah, I'm sure that we will find things. I'm not sure in relation to aging,
Yeah.
but I'm sure we're gonna be shocked, and we are shocked every day, and you know, uh, life is it's just incredible.
Yeah, definitely. And so what are you currently researching then these days?
Now I in addition to study aging, I'm very interested in the different kinds of hydra that live throughout the world.
Okay.
So I just came back from the east where we're studying a species with a colleague at UC Irvine, Rob Steele. There's a species, the hydra, that seem to be live in specific environments that you find in the east coast of the US. These are called black water environments. They're places where they're normally swamps, where water moves very slowly, and there's a lot of trees that deposit a lot of leaves that release chemicals that make the water kind of dark, the color of tea. They're called black water environments. And there is a specific species of hydra that lives in these environments. And they seem to be restricted to these environments.
Hmm.
Some of these are under pressure, like, for example, the Okefenokee swamp is such a place in southern Georgia. Um, right now, there is a project to mine right next to the Okefenokee. The Okefenokee is a national wildlife refuge. It's protected, but
Yeah.
there might be people getting permits to mine very close to the Okefenokee, and that might put the Okefenokee in danger. And there's this species of hydra that seems to be unique to this environment that lives there. So hopefully our study will show that the Okefenokee is worth protected, at least for this species of hydra. There are many other reasons why we should protect the Okefenokee. It's just a beautiful environment.
Sure.
Um, so I'm doing these kinds of studies. I'm going this summer to Norway to collect hydra because there's seem to be some species of hydra there that are unique, and I want to understand better their relationship with hydra from other parts of the world. So that's what I'm interested in, the biogeography of hydra right now, and right now on we're doing genomes. We're going beyond just study genes, and then we're sequencing their entire genomes and looking at differences like that. So we have sequenced the genomes of this hydra from the Okefenokee. We collected also this hydra in another swamp in Virginia, the Great Dismal Swamp. It lives also there. And we have sequenced their genomes. We're comparing them. So I'm doing a lot of genomics right now.
Interesting.
So
Okay. And do all Hydra have the same anti-aging ability
they
or?
all seem to not age. Yeah. As far
Okay.
as we can tell.
Wow.
I have other species of hydra. The initial work that I did was on hydra vulgaris, but I have also kept hydra oligactis in the lab for 6 years, and they don't seem to age.
Wow.
And
Okay.
interesting thing about hydra oligactis is if you lower the temperature, they start reproducing sexually, and they die in a few months, as
Hmm.
if they have what I call inducible aging. So you can lower the temperature, force them to reproduce sexually, and they age. But if you keep them at reproducing asexually, they don't. I have kept them for 6 years in my lab with no problem. But you can induce them to age.
Wow.
Now, whether or not that mortality that you see is really aging, or just as a result of the massive reproduction, they immediately, the entire bodies become covered with testes and covered with eggs, and they age,
Okay.
something that looks like aging. We don't know, but they, if they are not reproducing sexually, they do not age. I
Okay.
have data on that, not published, but I have data in my lab for
Yeah.
that.
And so the Hydra today, on the planet, how long has today's species lived on our planet without like evolving into something?
Well, the hydra is approximately 80 million years old.
Okay.
That number you have to take, with a grain of
Sure.
salt. The estimates vary, but let's say around that. So the split between the green hydra, there are hydra that have algae that live inside their cells, and we call those green hydra. And they separated from what we call the brown hydra, the ones that do not have algae inside their cells. And that split is around 80 million years.
Okay.
And then within the browns, there have been further splits, and there are different species. One of them is this one that lives in the Okefenokee and in the Great Dismal Swamp, which seem to be unique too.
Okay. And I mean, it sounds like given how they can switch from asexual reproduction to sexual reproduction, that they are pretty good at surviving for a long time, given how long they've been around.
Yeah. There are a lot of species that are more ancient than Hydra.
Sure.
But they, I mean, yeah, they're pretty unique, pretty tough actually. The way they live in this, I mean, this one feature of these black water environments is that the pH is very low, around 5, very acidic.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fish that cannot live there because their scales will melt, and Hydra can live there with no problem.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Hydra is pretty cool.
Awesome. And what's the best way for people to follow your work and keep track of your research?
I guess you can read my boring scientific papers, but or listen to podcasts.
Sure. Okay. Fair enough. That works.
Yeah,
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about your research
you're
and this
welcome. You're
fascinating
welcome.
aspect of life on Earth. So,
Yeah, well, very nice meeting you.